Most of the jobs look to have been solidified for the Panthers at the start of training camp, but with the injury front early on, it opens a window of opportunity.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, September 25th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Monoman12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Florida Panther fans, grateful to be back here on another edition of the show to discuss tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning live from the Kia Center, almost wanted to call it Amway Center, home of the Orlando Magic and the ECHL's Orlando Solar Bears tonight. There we will be there in person covering the game too, but we'll talk mostly about what to expect from the team and who is going to dress tonight for that. But to start off this first segment of the show, we are going to discuss what the Florida Panthers will be involved in and a little bit of the housekeeping for the Cats on what to expect from a viewership perspective this season for the Florida Panthers. Segment number 2, we'll be discussing the injury situation with Tomáš Nosek. And third segment, we'll be discussing the lineup and what came out of practice yesterday. So to start off the show today for this edition of the show, we knew for a few months now that Amazon was going to be coming up with a series, getting a little bit of insight on who these players are, more about who they are. And we knew that Matthew Tkachuk was going to be the Florida Panthers representative for this series. And so it's called Face Off Inside the NHL, which the series starts October 4th. So with Matthew Tkachuk being part of the 3rd and 6th episode, we're going to have to wait until that gets released. Kind of like how when ESPN Plus did the Quest for the Cup, they did not do it last postseason. Of all postseasons for them to not feature that, it's unfortunately the postseason that the Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup. Unfortunately for me, I finished the Quest to the Cup in 2023. Maybe like 4 or 5 weeks after the Panthers lost, to give you guys an idea of how long it took for me to truly get over the loss. But hey, this gives us an opportunity to like look back and everything on just the overall journey for the Cats as they completed their mission of winning the Stanley Cup. But episode 3 will be alongside with Jeremy Swayman, so we'll get the two perspectives on that. And in the Eastern Conference part of the bracket for the Stanley Cup playoffs, this was the hardest challenge, in my opinion, that the Florida Panthers faced, as offense was really hard to come by in this series for the Panthers. I mean, we spoke about the gauntlet of goaltenders that they went through, and Jeremy Swayman gave the Panthers the biggest of challenge, along with the blue line of the Boston Bruins, which obviously they got better this offseason with a big acquisition in Nikita Zadorov during the free agency period too, for them. And really, when you compare the other 2 rounds in the Eastern Conference part of the playoffs with Tampa Bay and New York, you weren't seeing as much dominance there and peppering as many shots on the opposition as in the second round series, as you saw in the first round and in the Eastern Conference final. And we're gonna get we're likely gonna see some questions based on to Jeremy Swayman on how he felt about the Sam Bennett punch to the face of Brad Marchand. Likely we're gonna discuss the goaltender interference in game 3 for the Panthers. Then game 4 where he pushed Charlie Coyle into Jeremy Swayman and then scored there. And obviously, let's not forget in that series, when the series shifted back to Sunrise, the Boston Bruins scored a goal on what we thought was a goaltender interference, but we mostly let that go because, admittedly so, we felt as if the Panthers got away with one there. So you basically call that even there. But also I want to get Matthew Tkachuk's point of view from how the Panthers started off the series and also how they responded at home, because in different instances during that series between the two teams, I mean, the Panthers home ice. Yeah, I know that in the Stanley Cup playoffs, more importantly in the NHL, home ice doesn't mean as much in this league versus the other four major sports. But also want to see his response on the Panthers just coming out flat in two out of the three home games that they had, too, in it, where multi-goal deficits. I mean, starting off for the team, and then how they respond. Obviously, we know how they responded after that, but I just want to see what kind of words that Matthew Tkachuk was using to get his team fired up, and also his true feelings there too, which we're likely gonna see more of that versus what we see in a media availability, where you have to be more filtered, more reserved, and everything too. Episode 6 of this will be featuring Connor McDavid and Matthew Tkachuk, and it's the part 2 of an episode in the Stanley Cup Final, where you're gonna see both guys featured. You see a little clip of Connor McDavid yelling at his team. I assume that's the part where they were down in the series, and you see him wearing the road jersey. So you're assuming that's maybe around game 2 of the final, or maybe game 5, as it's later in the series. You wouldn't probably see a frustration out of Connor McDavid early on in game 1, maybe too. And also with Matthew Tkachuk, seeing what he said I want to see what he said in between games 4 and 6, when the Panthers were just when their attention to detail wasn't as crisp, when it came to just how they battled in the neutral zone, errant passes that created breakaways, because as we saw in that series, Sergei Bobrovsky had a really hard time stopping them. There was a point where there was 5 straight breakaways that they scored a goal on too. So that I want to see what his response was to telling the team possibly to play a little tighter to prevent that. Everything regressed to the mean, obviously, back in game 7, where the Panthers were really, really structured in that, and we saw that with how they covered the crease in that game-winning goal right before the quick breakout to Sam Reinhart on the game winner, where Carver Hagee showed the screen. And once again, Paul Maurice spoke about that video that he showed to the new group this year, and just basically spoke about the fundamentals of getting the puck out and going north-south up the ice too. So I want to see what was said there. Also, Amazon will be doing their own edition of Red Zone start on Thursdays, but it's only available in Canada. So the Canadian listeners who also like football, American football, get an opportunity to get their own version of it. I wish that we here in the States had our opportunity to see that version of it, but we will see our version of it in late October for the Frozen Frenzy. So that will be our one and only opportunity of seeing that if you are a Panther fan residing in the United States too. So maybe this will give an opportunity for American viewers, hopefully, to get that on a consistent basis. So hopefully we get to see that. Also, more news on the streaming service that the Panthers are releasing, Panthers Plus. The season pass for Panthers Plus is $69.99. You could purchase it on the app, or you could also purchase it on a desktop at PanthersPlus.tv. And also a little bit of the experience if you are outside of the Florida Panthers broadcast region, outside of the Treasure Coast, Fort Myers, anywhere north of that, you could pay the money, but you will not be able to watch the Panthers games unless you are in the area. So a little bit on that about the viewing experience for the Panthers this season. But also, if you are outside of the region, you still have opportunities to watch them on ESPN Plus, unless it's a ESPN game, TNT, and and NHL Network type of games. So those are the games that just won't be featured on Panthers Plus too. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about the injury situation for the Panthers, who is likely to step in, and what one of the players had to say in his new elevated role. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you can place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And if you are a Dolphins fan like myself and you are betting on them while having a halftime deficit, which they have not had a lead throughout the first 3 weeks of the season, you can go place that all on FanDuel.com, where you could possibly make a return with their odds being so low of a comeback, and you could do that all there. So once again, you get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet, and that's all at FanDuel.com. And I'd like to thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday. And also another thing that the Florida Panthers have partnered with, we speak all about local flavor with the Panthers, with them being part of Script Sports, which is in partnership with Panthers Plus. Local rinks, which they made in Baptist Health for the Iceplex now. And there's another now local partnership that the Panthers are doing. And it's more and more on growing this team in the community. And obviously we spoke about the lease extension with Broward County. More and more the Panthers are Broward's team, and one partnership that they have made is with Stoner's Pizza, which has special promos on game days and the day after, which will be served outside of Section 312 starting on September 30th, and the locations outside of Amerant Bank Arena they have 2 of them, one in Davie, one of them in Las Olas in Broward County, and then one in Boca too. So that's another. So those are the locations outside of it where there's possibly promos. Chances are it'll be somewhat in relation to Huey Magoo's. If they win, you get some sort of BOGO package too. So once again, the Panthers are really embracing in the local community there as they are continuing to grow the sport of hockey too. But another thing that is happening in the world of the Florida Panthers is that Mackie Samoskevich is still out. He was not part of the second group in practice for the Panthers there, as the way the Panthers decided to conduct practice a few days after their doubleheader was a bag skate with the first group, mostly of guys who are for sure part of the team, and then a lighter skate for the group that is going to be playing up in Orlando. So in neither one of the groups, in the Lundell, Lusterine third line, though, was part of that first group. So part of me thinks that if Mackie was even healthy, that he would be part of that third line, and he would have been part of that bag skate. But Maurice did say that there's a flare up in his upper body injury, and that we saw Matt Luff in his spot. Matt Luff is on a PTO, still has an opportunity to make the team. But it doesn't look like that Mackie Samoschevich's spot is going anywhere. I went from literally for entertainment purposes only 99.9% sure of him making the team to 95. So that was again, entertainment purposes only for that. So Kai Schwint and Patrick Giles were some of the guys who filled in on the spot during the game on Sunday. Obviously, that was a split squad. Only so much that you could do with the roster that was there for the Panthers then. So there's also another opportunities there. Also look for Rasmus Asplund to be another name for the Panthers to possibly fill that's an opportunity on the wing there too. And also William Lockwood too is another player who has grown more into his body, and also with a guy who has a lot of foot speed, maybe a little indecisive with the puck, a little hesitant. Maybe he's a guy who could possibly be part of the fourth line for the Panthers, and then a guy elevated up to as right now the flanks for the bottom six for the Panthers is Jesper Boquist and AJ Greer, but that connects more into the injury situation with Tomas Nosek, weeks, but not days. And Maurice did say that it's not a concussion, too. So maybe something that will happen on season opening IR for the Panthers, too. So maybe an opportunity for another guy to fill in that spot. Also, Justin Sordiff went down too during the Group 2 part of practice, so he is likely not going to be playing tonight for the Panthers as they take the ice in Orlando. Also, Nosek, we saw him as a guy as the Kevin Stenlund replacement. This was the guy that we were hammering over and over and over again in the summer, and something that we spoke about earlier in the week about the fourth line guys not needing to be the ones who contribute offensively. If you can get the defensive part of their game down, then anything that's added offensively is a bonus too. But he's also not going to be part of that top PK unit for a little bit too. But replacing the top PK unit is Anton Lundell for the Panthers, and this is what we talk about so much more than it's more than just Lundell eventually taking that second line center role for the Panthers when this contract of Sam Bennett does expire, but more about taking the responsible D zone draws too for him, and we know what he can do as far as a playoff proven player. And also he's about to be 23 years old too, and he spoke about more about the opportunity there, and spoke about how gaining more muscle, best shape in his career, and being patient and knowing that even though he's won a Stanley Cup, as a young 22-year-old player, he's of his draft class, he has the most playoff games under his belt, but he himself even knows that he hasn't even matured so much into his own body too. Yet. And now getting that opportunity facing grown men as the first penalty kill unit on, too. That is once again just the foundation in which when you build this Florida Panthers team about that mix of veteran players that were here before the Bill Zito era, and then making the draft picks, even whether it's first round like Anton Lundell and Mackie Samoskevich recently, and even the guys later on in these last few drafts. I mean, I know we're all sorts of hyped about Grayson Sachin and even the most recent draft pick in Linus Eriksson, who we won't be expecting for a little while here, but also just knowing that the program, the system created here for the Panthers, it's just once again guys who have had the experience playing the hardest games of their career, and then continuing that on, and then continuing the next gradual approach step in a person's development. Anton Lundell, you think of that, and then him with Lusto, and then the next unit being more than likely Barkov and Rhino. As far as that, it's once again why I think that the PK unit will once again be somewhere around the top 5 to start the year too for the Panthers, and that's really for what we know and the continuity of these players here, that for the Panthers will be very very noteworthy for going into the season, and also something that we could maybe breathe a little bit too. It's mostly about the 5-on-5 play that we are going to be a little bit of looking out for, and kind of wondering how they're going to navigate everything with no Shek out too. Once again, Kai Schwitt, Patrick Giles, William Lockwood, Rasmus Asplund are a few guys who are going to be part of the mix too for the Panthers, and even on the wing, Jonah Gadjevich too. As we still don't know the timeline of Mackie Samoskevich, but things look to be signs of him returning very soon for the Panthers too. If there is still a revolving door of someone on that right wing of Lusterinen and Lundell too. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we are going to discuss more about the D pairs for the Panthers on what they've been looking like over the last day, and who is looking to be playing on as the quarterback on both of the power play units. We are going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. And we're driven for the search for better. When it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed just doesn't help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent. And listeners to the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about the Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. And thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday, where the Florida Panthers will be taking on the Tampa Bay Lightning tonight from Kia Center in Orlando. As once again, the Panthers and Lightning will renew their rivalry in a neutral site setting, which once again, I'm very excited to see what the turnout will be as a mix of Panthers and Lightning fans, as 5 straight years of the Eastern Conference representative being from a team from the state of Florida, with the Florida team taking 3 out of the last 5 Stanley Cups. Hopefully the Panthers can match it with 6 trips in a row for Florida teams, and matching the amount of Stanley Cup wins for them too. So also, I want to mention this before I continue on. The Panthers have, right before recording, the Panthers have announced that they will be holding a championship ring ceremony on October 7th at 6:30, and tickets are $20, which include parking, which you can buy them starting at 2 p.m. today. You can buy them at SeatGeek, and they will go to the Florida Panthers Foundation. So a little bit of housekeeping there too. So D pairs, as of right now, from what we have seen in practice, with Aaron Ekblad and Gustav Forsling being reunited as far as that pair. Kulikov and Nico Mikkola are together back as something that we expected. I personally don't expect this to be a pair all year, as the Panthers are likely to go after someone in the trade deadline to get some defense help. Who knows? And by the way, we saw Grayson Sachin and Hunter St. Martin be part of the Panthers the very next day after that doubleheader, but we still expect them to return to junior hockey too. We did mention earlier that the top 9 was still intact for the most part, with the revolving door of the right wing for that first group, which once again, they are not going to be taking the ice tonight in Orlando too for this game. So we could expect the guys we mentioned earlier, which also the lineup of forwards, including that, will be Josh Davies, Ryan McAllister, Mackenzie Entwistle, William Lockwood, Zach Dalpe, Wilmer Skoog. Those are some of the guys who'll be playing. But also part of that second group too that skated will be Nate Schmidt, Adam Boquist, Juvis Belinskas, Matt Kierstead, Tobias Bjornfoot, Miklos Havorka. So that is part of the group that will be taking the ice tonight. And we won't see Sergei Bobrovsky or Spencer Knight. So one of the 3 goalies will be playing in Chris Drieger, Ken Appleby, and Cooper Black. And also the way that the Panthers plan to use their goaltenders, it won't be 50-50 split just like they did in the doubleheader. It'll either be 2 full periods or the full game. So we'll get more of that. And part of me thinks that Chris Drieger will be the starting goaltender for at least the first 2 periods to get a little bit of game action for him of how he's working himself back from the injury, although he was part of a postseason run for the Coachella Valley Firebirds last season, but also a full training camp for him and him to see how healthy he is, as he's going to be he's going to be a guy who if it's not him being the second goaltender, he's going to be one that the Charlotte Checkers are going to rely on, as more like in the AHL, they use the 3 goalie system on the rotation, as Cooper Black will be looking to get more of what the rotation of how it's like to be at the pro hockey level versus what he's dealt with when playing at Dartmouth, too, for him too. But also for the Cats today, in morning skate, it was the guys who aren't playing tonight, but we saw a little bit of work for the power play for the Panthers, as Adam Boquist was leading power play 1 and Nate Schmidt leading power play 2. A lot of fans were asking about Gustav Forsling there on the first power play unit too. And Alex Baumgartner also brought up a great point, and this is something that we also mentioned on the show, of Gustav Forsling and possibility of power play 1 versus not, and just the fact that he plays already so many minutes to with even with 5-on-5 being part of the PK, and also if you add on the minutes for a power play quarterback, it's only going to ramp up so much. Obviously, he's paid a really reasonable contract by the Florida Panthers here, and thankfully, if he were making somewhere along the lines of $9 million, we'd be pouring on the amount of expectations of, hey, you're making $9 million, you should be the power play quarterback here too. So thankfully, we don't have to we don't hear that type of noise too. But even at 27 years old for Gustav Forsling, his time on ice last year, 22 minutes, the year before, even more, 23. So how effective will Gustav Forsling be if he gets closer to the range of 27-ish minutes by playing in all 3 phases of the game? We haven't seen anything like that before. And also, we even spoke about that with a forward position in Carter Verhaeghe, on adding him to the power play. First few years for the Florida Panthers, he was playing mostly 5-on-5 and nothing else, and so slowly graduating to the power play for the Panthers. So this was once again like a slow process for the Panthers too. And mostly you're going to be looking at and obviously when we get to the postseason, and if the going gets tough, you might see that change for Gustav Forsling. Will he get some power play time? Absolutely, he will. He will get some. It's not like he's going to be completely away from it, period. We've seen him play a good amount of that, especially if an injury happens too. But to get to the point where you're adding, like during the regular season, an extra minute or 2 in the game. I mean, Brandon Montour, the last few seasons, his time on ice in 2023 was just north of 24, and then in last year 23 and a half minutes too for him too. But obviously he was playing second pair minutes versus Gustav Forsling playing the first pair. So how does that so it's not so a little bit of context there for the distribution of ice time while he got more of that power play time than Gustav Forsling. So the average time on ice total evens out a little bit more when you're comparing the two guys too. But I don't think it's crazy to say that Adam Boquist's offensive ceiling is higher than Gustav Forsling. I mean, even in 1 year where he played 52 games for the Columbus Blue Jackets, he had 11 goals for the Jackets there in his 52 games, 11 goals and 11 assists there too. Obviously, he's never played an 82 game season. Obviously, in the first few years of him being in Chicago, 41 games at the NHL level, while he played 15 in the AHL, and then being outside of 2022, which was the first season where we were out of COVID. The year before, where it was a 56 game season, he was playing 35 games out of the 56 for the Chicago Blackhawks too. So It's about and even in that small sample size, though, even though I'm talking just points there too, it's not crazy to say that I think the offensive ceiling on special teams for Adam Boquist will be higher than Gustav Forsling there too. And obviously with a guy in Nate Schmidt, who has played in multiple teams, multiple situations too. Uh, he even spoke about in his opening press conference that he wasn't really doing well on the first part of special teams on the power play, that he had to shift back to getting the game right on the defensive end, on the kill too. So as he's grown older, maybe that's something that he has improved on in his game. So this is really about the guys who have been there before in this situation. That's why you see Adam Boquist taking the quarterback spot on the power play for the Panthers. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. On tomorrow's show, we are going to recap Wednesday's game between the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning from Orlando, and also prepare you guys for the weekend ahead of games for the Florida Panthers, as they'll be playing a back-to-back on Saturday and Sunday. So we'll be back with you guys then to discuss that and more. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.